Hello chess fans, in this video I'm going to show you one more very exciting game played by the one and only Hans Niemann. Hans is playing with the black pieces against a very strong and experienced grandmaster from Azerbaijan, Rauf Mamedov. And the game is played in the second round of the Turkish team championships in Ankara. And some very bizarre things are happening in this game. Something I cannot recall I've ever seen it before. What it is, I will tell you in a couple of minutes. Just make sure that you watch the entire video and you do subscribe to the channel if you would like to see more exciting games played by Hans and many other strong grandmasters. You can also help the channel to grow by like this video or make a PayPal donation. So thank you very much for all the support. Here we go, Rauf Mamedov with white playing against Hans Niemann. Rauf opens the game with 1 e4. Hans goes for e5, knight f3, knight c6. Now after knight c3, knight f6, white goes for the move d4 and we have the Scotch 4 knights. All the 4 knights have been developed already and it's considered to be a very solid way of playing, like almost risk-free. But stay tuned guys, a lot of things are going to happen. Pawn takes d4, knight takes d4, Hans goes for the main line with bishop b4. Knight takes knight, black does a recapture with the b-pawn, bishop comes out to d3 to protect the pawn one more time. Both sides are going to castle, and here's the move d5. Now basically there are two main options. The first one is to take on d5, and after that pawn takes d5, white is super solid, but also black does have an extra pawn in the center. I mean, a lot of games have been played with that. The move played by Mamedov is bishop d2. It's kind of a new move, has been played in the last few years, but before it was kind of unknown. But it involves a pawn sacrifice. Let's see what happens, because here black does trade off the bishop for the knight, removing a defender of the pawn on e4. Bishop takes c3. And this is already a very interesting moment because black has to make a decision. What is he going to do? Is he going to take with a knight on e4 or with a pawn? Now, a lot of games continued like this. Pawn takes e4 and a lot of pieces were exchanged. Bishop takes f6, queen takes, bishop takes e4. Now, these double pawns, they are not looking very nice. So white looks like it's a bit better. But there's this forcing sequence. After queen takes b2, you take on c6, attacking the rook. Rook b8, white goes rook b1. If the queen goes away, the rook on b8 is hanging. So black has no choice but to trade off all the pieces here on b1. And that leads to some sort of an endgame, which, well, it's pretty drawish. I mean, I think there have been almost only draws in this position. So that's probably what Rauf was happy to go for. He wanted to play a very solid, risk-free type of position. But let's get back to the game, as Hans is not interested in this kind of forcing sequences, and instead of taking with the pawn, he does take with the knight on e4. Now, after bishop takes e4, pawn takes e4, he is a pawn up. It should be said though that the pawn on c6 and also the pawn on c7, they are not looking that great. Also white's bishop on c3 is looking quite nice, potentially exerting quite a bit of pressure against the black king. But okay, black is a pawn up. So how is white going to proceed now? Well, they follow the move queen e2, avoiding the exchange of queens, and white is hitting the pawn on e4. Well, black protects it with the move rook e8. It's one way to defend the pawn, useful move to put a rook there. What should white do? White is not really able to regain the pawn immediately, but with the move queen e3, white is trying to set up some control over the dark square. So you can imagine the bishop and queen are going to work together. For instance, now after the move h6, which was played in the game, they followed the move queen g3. White is threatening checkmate in 1 on g7, thanks to the support of this bishop. But black has a very nice idea to neutralize that threat with the move f6. You can see now a lot of pawn moves in front of the black king, but placing the pawn on f6 is actually quite a clever idea, because now the pressure against the pawn on g7 is gone and it makes the bishop on c3 look much worse now. So rook fe1, white is putting the rook on the e file. The queen goes to e7, supporting the pawn, keeping the pawn on c7 defended as well, because the pawn on c7 is always eyed by the queen on g3. Queen f4 played. So in a way, white is trying to create some play against the pawn on e4. So for instance, if you do get a chance to go rook e3, rook a e1, you're attacking the pawn for a third time. But there are also ideas, for instance, to play f3 anytime soon, and then you can try to exploit the pin on the e file. But the game goes on. It's black's turn, and black played here the move rook b8. Very interesting idea. So what is the point of this move? Black is trying to activate the rook before developing the bishop. So where's the rook going? Well, if you do get a chance, ideas with rook b5, possibly even rook f5 are in the air, and the rook can start looking for opportunities to generate threats against the queen, against white's king side. So here white played the move a4. It's very understandable. Once you understand what your opponent wants to do, you can try to prevent it. But of course, it also takes time from white to complete its development. For instance, the rook on a1 is still not doing much. Black played here the move c5. What is the idea of this move? Well, white played here the move b3, trying to solidify the queen side formation. But once again, it's a rather slow approach by Mamedov. And rook b6 is played. So now the rook finds an alternative plan, alternative way to join the action. And here the rook is going to be employed along the 6th rank. There was no way to reach the king side via the 5th rank, but now via the 6th rank. That's why you push the pawn to c5. The rook is ready to join play. So now, remarkable decision by white. Bishop a5 played. In a way also understandable, as you do hit the rook if the rook goes away. For instance, to e6, there is queen takes c7. And thanks to the bishop on a5, white is able to regain the pawn. Therefore, instead of playing the move rook e6, rook d6 is played. So that you're closing, interfering on this diagonal. So there's no threat against the pawn on c7. And also the rook does control the d file. Now, white played here the move h3. Kind of a useful move, probably. That's at least what white is thinking, just to avoid any back rank problems later on. But now, here, look what happens. This is the turning point in the game as black played the move f5. Now the pawn is supporting the pawn on e4. And you can see that black is clearly improving his position over the last couple of moves. And if possible, there are maybe even ideas to launch an attack with very aggressive moves like g5, attacking the queen. If the queen goes away, you can start mobilizing your pawn majority on the king side. So that is a very ambitious way of playing. Now white dropped back with the queen to e3, attacking the pawn on c5. So you can see that white has some serious ideas trying to regain the pawn. But black is not interested in this pawn, and rather than trying to save it, for instance, by moving the rook away so that the queen defends the pawn, here they followed the move queen f7. I think that's a very interesting idea. And you can see black now has plans to push the pawn to f4, attacking the queen. And well, big moment in the game. This is in fact the huge turning point, even more important than what I announced 2 moves earlier. But look now what's going to happen. White captured the pawn on c5, so material is even again. But definitely he underestimates the danger created by this move f4. What white could have considered instead here is to prevent black from carrying out that attack here with the move f4 himself. It's a typical plan in a lot of positions. You're stopping the march of the f-pawn, which makes it also harder for the bishop to join play because the pawns are fixed on the same color. This bishop cannot easily be activated. And of course, the big problem here for black is that you cannot capture en passant, as the rook on e8 is just hanging. There's queen takes e8 and white wins material. So let's get back. Queen takes c5 was played. f4 on the board. Material's even, but white is even going to grab another pawn. Queen takes c7, attacking the rook, offering the exchange of queens. And that is something white, of course, is aiming for. If white can get queens off the board, then the attack will be over. Therefore, queen g6 is played. Excellent move, keeping the rook defended. And, well, there are a lot of ideas, and in particular, bishop takes h3 is a huge move, making use of the fact that the pawn on g2 is pinned. How should white cope with all these threats? Well, for instance, if you do move your king out of the g-file with king h2, there are no immediate ways to break through. But with a move like rook f6, all black's pieces are fantastically placed and supporting the march of these pawns. So on every move, white has to think of pawn breaks like e3 or f3. Maybe bishop sacrifices at some point are coming in the air. And you can see that the extra pawn of white on the queen side, it's pretty useless. I mean, if the pawn is not really doing anything, I mean, black can definitely seize the initiative on the other side of the board. So, of course, Mamedov understood that things are getting really sharp now. And rather than getting out of that pin, he played here the move rook takes e4. That is absolutely bizarre. What is the idea of this move? Well, first of all, the rook can be captured in two different ways, with either the queen or the rook. If you do take with the queen, there is the move queen takes d6, and white is up 2 pawns. There are no immediate threats here for black. So that's not such a good idea. If you do instead take with the rook on e4, then white's idea is to take on c8 with check. And now you have a position with a bishop and 2 pawns against the rook. I mean, absolutely unclear. Probably black is still super active with these rooks dominating the open files. But, I mean, the character of play is changing and there are no immediate threats against the white king. However, there is even a third option, and that is absolutely amazing. As rather than capturing the rook, look what Hans did here. He sacrificed, not really a real sacrifice, bishop takes h3. Of course, the bishop is not hanging, cannot be taken because of the pin, but the big point is revealed on the next move, because after rook takes e8, of course, you're not going to take back with the queen. As after queen takes e8, there's queen takes d6, and you're just up a rook as white. But this is the real sacrifice. King h7, you're not recapturing the rook on e8, and the reason is you want to keep your queen on g6 to maintain the threat against the pawn on g2. So mating threat is still there. White gotta do something about it. Played here the move queen to b7, defending the pawn on g2. And now another big blow, and this must have all been calculated by Hans Niemann in advance. He played here the move rook c6. Excellent move, interfering on this diagonal, blocking the queen. And what should white do? I mean, if you here trying to give back the material with queen takes c6, there is queen takes c6. Now the queen is no longer on g6 to pin the bishop, but after g takes h3, the problem is there's queen takes e8 and black is winning. I mean, material-wise, it's still interesting. A lot of things can happen, but I think this f-pawn is really strong, and if the pawn comes to f3, you still have ideas to keep on playing against the white king. So position is just lost for white. Instead of giving back the queen, there followed the move g3. And white is still up a rook, but after pawn takes g3, his king is just wide open. White cannot really do much. If you ever take on g3, it's queen takes g3, king h1, checkmate on g2. That's not going to work. White played here the move queen to b8. Keeping an eye on this diagonal, and more importantly, even threatening checkmate on h8. But it's black's turn first. Pawn takes f2 with double check. If the king goes to the h-file, it is checkmate on g2. So white is forced to take with the king. Now it's rook takes c2 with check. White is still up a rook, but his king has no defenders. It's completely hopeless here. If you go with your king back to e1, it's ladder mate with queen and rook. So the king goes up to e3. And now, very important, because look at this. The rook is covering the king on the e-file. The queen is covering a lot of dark squares on the b8, h2 diagonal. So the only really good check here is the move queen g5. Of course, this was seen in advance. Now, the king has different ways to play here. But let's cover some of them. If you go king f3, there is bishop g2 with a beautiful mate with queen and bishop, and the rook is covering the second rank of course. And if you, for instance, play something like king d3, there will follow bishop f5 with check, and the bishop even defends the the rook on c2 indirectly, king d4, queen g4. One line is that if king e3, there's rook e2 with checkmate. And if the king instead goes to d5, you can give a check on f3. There's no time at all here for white to consolidate the safety of his own king. And no way to interfere with any of the pieces. King d6, queen c6 check, for instance, king e5, queen e4, king d6, rook c6 with checkmate. It's just one line. This is so typical and not difficult at all for these guys to calculate. It's a forcing sequence. So, well, here, queen f4 was played. White drops back with the queen, hoping to exchange queens. But there is rook e2. Excellent shot, deflecting the king from supporting the queen on f4. Now, if you try to keep the queen defended with your king, there's queen g2 with checkmate. So that doesn't work. King takes e2 was played. Now queen takes f4. And we have the situation of two rooks versus a queen. But how should we evaluate it? Well, completely winning for black. And the reason is that the white pieces, they are not working together at all. The white king is also open. Bishop drop back to d2. Very natural response, trying to consolidate the safety of the king with an attack on the queen. But there's bishop to g4. King d3 was played. Bishop f5. And here you see that the king is in trouble. If the king tries to escape to the queen side, there is queen c7. And well, here your king is in big trouble. If you go king b2, there is queen c2. You're picking up the bishop. And instead, if you play here to move king to b4, there's queen d6. And after king c3, you can pick up the rook with queen c6. This is a very typical problem with unprotected rooks. So therefore, instead of king c3, king e2 was played. And here, queen g4 is the final move of the game. White resigned here because the king doesn't have a good square to go to. If you, for instance, go to e1, it's queen g1 with skewer. You're picking up the rook on a1, so that doesn't help. If you go to f2, it's a double attack on the rook and king, and also the bishop, of course, but you will pick up the rook. That's the simplest line. And for instance, if you go king e3, there is queen to g3, and after king e2, bishop to g4 is a good move. Also forcing line, king f1, queen f3. Again, there's a choice. If you play here king g1, it is bishop to a3 with mate on g2. And instead, if you go with your king to e1, well, then again, there is a very nice skewer on h1. You're picking up the rook. I mean, maybe for you, this is difficult to find all over the place, but when you have a lot of experience, you realize that in such positions, the moment where you get this position with queen versus two rooks, it's all about these unprotected pieces. White cannot keep everything defended, and that's why black is completely winning here with a massive attack thanks to the queen and bishop. Let me know, guys, what you think of this game. I thought this was a very impressive game played by Hans Niemann, and now you may think, well, this was just a normal attack. Well, keep in mind that his opponent played one of the most solid openings, the Scotch 4 Knights, and it's very difficult to create something there as black. But Hans managed to do that. Very, very impressive stuff. If you ask my opinion, let me know in the comments what you think of this game, and hopefully more exciting games from Hans in the next couple of rounds, as he is right now on 27-10 in the live rating list, number 28 in the world. Very, very interesting. We'll keep following him, and also all the other top players as well. Thanks for watching. See you soon. Bye bye.